Hi, my name's David Weiss. I recently published a book, Take the Phi Road, which is based on the universal wisdom of Phi and how we can use it in our lives, both for personal and planetary transformation. So if you haven't seen the intro video, I suggest go back and see it because I unpacked a lot of new terms in that video, and I'd like to continue onward and talk about the object-oriented language. I mentioned that we use object-oriented language, and when we do, we tend to focus out here with that, and I'm making this kind of an exaggeration of the virtual reality of our mind is how we project and put object-oriented labels on a shelf. And we do that in our naming. We do that in our, like I'm a student, I'm a teacher, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I deserve this or I don't deserve that kind of thinking. And so the nature of object thinking takes us out of the intrinsic flow of Phi, which is naturally unfolding. And we've come sort of in a hybrid capacity. We have Phi and non-Phi character. I suspect that the non-Phi has been introduced ages ago. Perhaps that was part of the fall of man that's been reported by mythologies and religions. But whatever the case, we tend to drift outside of that Phi design. And the Phi design is what holds energy. That's how energy flows through the universe, whether you're birthing planets or persons. So let's take a look at the notions of objective, subjective, rational, and irrational. And I'll do my best to unpack that too. All right, so when we put something on our object shelf and we're in a flow state, the Phi part is in the natural flow state. Every time we reference it, and then in turn from that reference point take it out into the world, we're tethering to this non-Phi design, and it bleeds off our energy. It slows us down. We can't simultaneously be in a flow state and have static pictures. It'd be like watching a movie and then trying to reach out and grab one frame of the movie while it's going. You can't do that, and that's what we do. And so we're in this like having the brake and the accelerator at the same time happening, and it happens in the mind. And why do we do this? Well, I went into that in the first video. That was the our survival memes and our identity. And when we put our focus out here and we're transfixed, it's like somebody waving, doing the pocket watch and putting you in a trance. That is how we create that narcissistic addiction to object-oriented identities from which we project into our reality. And the trick here is bring the focus back inside, connect with the Phi nature, walk through the world but not of it. We're not going to get rid of our language overnight or even our infrastructure. These are in place, but we can learn how to be mindful, read the energy and be in that energetic place so that we're reading from the energy and reading between the lines rather than getting caught up in the boxes. When we get caught up in the boxes, that creates a lot of victimization as well, and if I have time I'll go into it now, or maybe it'll be another video. So let's take a look at the mathematical part of it. Let's do a little bit of easy math. From high school, you probably remember studying a circle. Imagine a circle for a moment. Imagine that if it was 4 inches in diameter. Okay. And now imagine that if you walked up to a circle that was 4,000 miles in diameter. Would your perception be a little bit different? Would you see the entire circle? Probably not. So that is part of why we get into object thinking, is we miss the continuity of the whole because we're only looking at a very small piece of it. And Phi is the same way. Phi is continuous, just like a circle, and so we study a very small piece of it, and we miss the big picture. We look up in the sky, we can see a spiraling galaxy that has a Phi character in it, but if you were sitting on one of those planets, you wouldn't necessarily see the rest of that spiral. And then you have to ask the question, what is that energy web that invigorates that spiral that's light years apart, hundreds of light years apart even, between planets and stars? So that energy matrix goes through the universe. I just want to reinforce that right now. But let's get back to objective, subjective. The notion of when we look at the circle, you remember that the circumference is 2 pi r. 2 times pi times r. And pi is that magic number. It's called an irrational number. It's not rational, and the way they define it is based on whether you can use a fraction to describe it. There's no fraction to describe it. And think of the word fraction, fractionate, divide, and that creates some separation. But pi is one of those, it goes on infinity, 3.1416, all the way out. It just keeps going. And look at the circle. The circle is continuous. That is the phi contribution to that circle. I mean, that's the pi contribution, that's the continuous contribution to that circle. Phi is the same way, 1.618 off to infinity. It's also irrational. And it has that continuity, whether you decide there's a Big Bang or not, we have that spiral, and everything is being carried through that spiral, including us. And that is continuous flow of energy. That's how phi works. But if you took, for example, 1 point on that circle or 1 point on that spiral, you'd miss the big picture. But that would be our quote-unquote objective thinking, trying to elucidate the details. The other part of that is, what is a rational number? Rational numbers can be described by fractions. We can carve up that pi, and we can, that's part of being able to fractionate and objectify and so forth. But what happens when you take a fractional mindset and divorce the mind from the emotions and from the spirit and from the physical? Well, if you're into science, you might be in cloud heaven because you're being objective and you're detached, but you might miss the big picture. You know, if your grant money only covers this much, and you decide you want to cover its connectivity into infinity, there's no grant money for that. So, rational, irrational, we're told to behave rationally, but that means cutting off our phi. If we behave rationally, we're cutting out phi. Do we really want to do that? I don't think so. So the theme of this video is dare to be irrational and connect with your phi nature. Through phi nature, we have resonance, and we get to see our true nature. We actually can read between the lines when people are talking to us and they're using these object-oriented words. We get to feel their heart, the essence. And it's less likely to create a sense of victimization. Once you create a victim box, because some group did this to you or something happened to you, as long as you're focusing on it, it's a narcissistic split from your core essence out to an identity, and identities require maintenance. Static identities require your maintenance. So you either got to maintain that victim stance or you got to give it up. A lot of us don't want to give up that victim stance. So we create, we bring people together to celebrate our victimization. We miss the energy gift that's in here, and I see that happening a lot in the world today. But if we take the words with a grain of salt, take those object-oriented words with a grain of salt, come back inside, feel. Phi and love are very much connected. So if you are in touch with your love, you're going to find Phi, and if you're in touch with Phi, you're going to find love. And start being in that place when you're in your communications. And if you see yourself identifying with labels, victim labels, or just routine everyday labels, try backing off and letting your awareness that we talked about in the first video, let your awareness cover out here. Let your focus be in here. Let the awareness tell you what moment-to-moment course corrections you need to make. And that is tying together objective, subjective. Subjective is just putting it all together. And we get ridiculed in science if we're saying we're too subjective. That's because we're embracing our viewpoint. Wait a minute, you can't view, and we want to throw out our viewpoint in favor of the objective. And we're throwing out a big part of ourselves. I look at the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is what we might consider the objective. The subjective would include not only the tip of the iceberg, but the rest of it too. That's another way to look at this. So I hope I've given you a couple things to think about. check out my website. Well, right now it just redirects to the publisher, but it's Take the Phi Road, and the Facebook is also Take the Phi Road. Please bring your facets, share your piece of unique wisdom, and this is something that we pay forward, and we help each other and the planet and beyond. Thank you.